Look, I want to be crystal clear. It is my expectation that the President and this administration will follow what Judge Robart ruled today. And whatever means I need to use, Professor, to make sure that happens, I will absolutely utilize every tool that I have. Nothing is more sacred in our country than the rule of law, period, full stop. That's it. And it applies to everybody in our country, even the President. In some respects, especially the President. And that's a principle of why I went to law school and why I practice as an attorney, to uphold the constitutional rights of the people who I represent. And yes, you can be sure I'll use every tool at my disposal to make sure the federal government follows this order by this judge here today.
Mr. Attorney General, what would be the next step, assuming the White House is going to try to challenge this judge's ruling? Is it the Fifth Circuit? And if so, is that something that could take place this weekend?
So it's the Ninth Circuit, the states out here in the western part of that's no problem in the western United States. So it's really best directed for the federal government. But yes, that they could seek an immediate review by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They could wait until Judge Robart issues a final decision on the merits to our complaint and our motion here in the Western District of Washington. That'll be up to the federal government to decide. What I told my team to do before I left to come down here to the studio was get a good night's rest, because we may be right back at it tomorrow with whatever may be coming our way. The bottom line, though, is we're absolutely prepared to continue working around the clock to defend the constitutional rights of the people of my state.
I know a number of other of our panelists have some questions for you. If you can stick around, David Gergen, I think you had a question with the Attorney General.
Yes, Mr. Attorney General, thank you for coming back. Fascinating conversations.
You bet.
Could you help us, sir, if you were to prevail at this, not only on the temporary restraining order, but on the merits, on the substance underneath, what cures are you seeking in the executive order so we know how the world may change? Obviously, the federal government, the President does have authority to strengthen the vetting process. We've seen that in numerous presidents, especially since 9/11. So what are you arguing this administration can do that would cure the problems you're raising?
Well, I guess I'm not sure I'm in a position to say, it's not my job to say what they need to do to cure it. I think my job is to point out the unconstitutionality of the order and how it's unlawful. That said, your point's well taken that, in general, presidents do have broad discretion to sign executive orders. Now, as part of the case made by the lawyers for the federal government today. But as the judge asked a number of times was, hey, are there any limits to that? And the lawyers for the federal government, frankly, did not want to answer that question directly. But there are limits to any president's action. There are limits
can you give us
even on executive order.
Two or three specifics that you would strike down that if you win?
Well, I guess I'm not sure I wanted the Sections 3 and Sections 5 are the focus of the executive order, are the focus of what our claims are directed at. We also have the statutory claims as well. So, for example, there was no due process whatsoever for individuals who were denied entry to this country, right? Just basic due process suggests you've got to follow and allow certain due process for the people of our country. They're entitled to that under the Constitution. And so that's an example of a part of this order that failed the constitutional test that the court was looking at.
Mr. Attorney General, we've just gotten, should point out to our viewers, 7 pages of the judge's ruling. We're all going through it. So, but I know Paul Callan, legal analyst, would like to ask you a question, I think, based on some of what he's read. Paul?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of Americans are wondering why the state of Washington, or it is the federal judge sitting in the state of Washington, why does his order bind the whole United States of America when there are other federal judges in other districts who differ on this? Do you think you acted properly in asking that the order be imposed on the entire nation without waiting to see how the other district courts viewed it? Does that strike you as being a fair way to approach it?
I'm not going to wait to uphold the constitutional rights of my people. It's quite the opposite. I instructed my team last weekend. We're working through the weekend. We're filing Monday. I'm not going to wait 1 hour, 1 day longer when the constitutional rights of the people of my state are being violated by the president. That's number one. Number two, I've not seen what the Massachusetts judge ruled today. I have not had a chance to take a look at that. But multiple judges, as you know, ruled in favor of individuals who are bringing claims, who are denied entry to this country. So the overwhelming majority of the courts that have looked at these issues have ruled in favor of a small group of plaintiffs, of individuals, for their specific claims, or in our situation, on behalf of the state of Washington. So it's very clear what direction judges all around the country are going on this.
Well, I understand
They're
that,
expressing their concerns about this order.
I understand that, Mr. Attorney General. But the question is, you hadn't even read the judge's order, and you were asking the judge to impose it on the entire United States. Don't you think you're moving a little bit too quickly?
You may think we're moving too quickly to uphold the constitutional rights of the people of my state, but I do not. And the judge was very clear in his oral rule that this applied nationwide. And to be candid, when President Obama was president, Republican AGs challenged different aspects of decisions he made, and federal district court judges could issue decisions that impacted the entire country. That happened when President Obama was president. It's happening here. But just to be clear, there is no part of my job description that says I should wait to uphold the constitutional rights of the people of my state. And moreover, and this is important, Anderson, for people to come to my state, they of course fly from all sorts of different airports as they connect into my state. My lawsuit was joined by the state of Minnesota as well, and the judge mentioned that. So in order to achieve the relief we're seeking, I think the judge appropriately issued this on a nationwide basis.
For people who are watching around the world who may have had their visas rescinded, is there anything you can say tonight about how they should proceed, if at all? I mean, if this really does change anything, or do they have to wait until the Ninth Circuit rules? Is there anything you can directly say to them?
Anderson, I wish I could answer that question. We literally just walked out of the courtroom, an hour and a half or so ago. So I'm not in a position to answer that question directly, but I'm sure these things will be getting worked out soon. The bottom line, though, is the federal government has a responsibility to move quickly to implement the judge's decision tonight.
What was the federal government, the Department of Justice, was their ability to argue this in the court in Washington against you? Was it affected by what happened with the Department of Justice, where the acting assistant attorney general told her attorneys to not defend this, and then she obviously was fired and replaced? I mean, I assume there were federal lawyers arguing against your case.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Anderson, because, of course, there were attorneys there for the federal government. They did an excellent job. They're excellent attorneys. I know who they are. I read their brief. Their brief was filed at midnight last night. I received an email from my team at midnight last night with a copy of their brief. It was excellent. They did a very good job advocating for their position and did an excellent job at the oral argument, answering very difficult and challenging questions from Judge Robart. So no, the federal government's position was about as well articulated and briefed as you'd want to see. I'd encourage any of your legal experts to take a look at their brief. It was very well done and praised by the judge.
I want to bring Denny Savalas, who's been reading the judge's ruling. Denny?
Yes, I think Mr. Attorney General, you haven't even had the benefit of reading this yet. This is hot off the presses to us. And it's interesting that, we were talking about enforcing the power of a federal court to enforce this law, not only in the state where it sits, but nationwide. And it appears that this judge, in his opinion, addressed just that, citing precedent in the Fifth Circuit that the immigration laws of the should be enforced vigorously and uniformly. And of course, you also retreat back to some basic principles like Marbury v. Madison. The essence of federal courts is that they can question and ultimately strike down federal law. So it's not a great stretch to say that an executive order falls within that family.
I appreciate it. I've not had a chance to read it, as you pointed out, so I appreciate you mentioning that. And those are important principles. So I recognize that it may be counterintuitive to folks watching, like, hey, how can a judge anywhere in the country have that kind of impact? I don't want to say it happens all the time, but it is not particularly unusual that judges do have that power, particularly in the areas that you mentioned.
But, Mr. Attorney General, I will point out, too, that as we had spoken about earlier, this short opinion here does not mention which of your grounds, constitutional or statutory, it based this TRO on. And I'm sure you're going to find that very curious and wonder when you're going to get some clarity.
I'll look forward to when the judge elaborates, but what he needed to find, the standard of review that he was looking at today for our TRO, for our temporary restraining order, was likelihood of success on the merits combined with other factors. And he clearly found that we had the likelihood of success on the merits here, and I'm confident when he eventually makes an ultimate ruling on this, that'll go our way.
Mr. Attorney General, just a couple more. I know Professor Dershowitz has been reading now the judge's finding and wanted to ask you a question based on it. Professor?
You bet.
Well, the judge's order is really fascinating because it does say that the statute requires uniformity, but now we have one judge in Washington saying uniformity around the country requires that it be blocked, and another judge in another part of the country saying uniformity around the country requires that it not be blocked. So